Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." John 3:3. Hello, welcome to Geekdom of God. I'm your host, Ciantir, and today I want to talk about being born again. But before I do, I should wish everyone a Merry Christmas. Anyway, the idea in Christianity of being born again is a well-known one, if for no other reason than Christians often identify themselves that way. Born-again Christian is technically a redundant phrase, however, in a similar way that the phrase wet water is redundant. The phrase itself comes from a conversation Jesus had with the Jewish religious leader Nicodemus. This conversation is recorded for us in John 3, 1-21, which means it also contains the famous John 3:16. There's a lot of good stuff in this conversation, but for the purposes of this episode, I'm only going to look at John 3, 1-9 in the interest of focus. Let's start at the beginning of this with John 3, 1-2. Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him." This is rather interesting. Here we see a member of the Jewish ruling council acknowledging that Jesus came from God. This shows us that there was division of opinion on Jesus even within this ruling body. It's easy to do, but we shouldn't gloss over this fact. Not all Pharisees were of the type upon whom Jesus lay woe after woe. Not all members of the Jewish religious elite were anti-Jesus. That the prominent and powerful ones were doesn't mean we should paint all of them with those brushes. Anyway, Jesus responds to this statement by Nicodemus with a rather odd proclamation about needing to be born again, found in John 3:3. Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." Never mind that this is a strange response to Nicodemus' statement. It's also, on the face of it, an extremely confusing statement. Nicodemus says as much in John 3:4. "How can someone be born when they are old?" Nicodemus asked. "Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born." Surely not. I think this is a very valid question. How indeed can someone be born again? For that matter, what is birth? Is it not to exit the womb into life? To go from being a proto-being into a full, independent being? Or at least as independent and full as a newborn is, at any rate. How then can someone be born again? The concept makes no sense. That is, it doesn't make sense in the way that Nicodemus understood those words. Let's see how Jesus answers this question in John 3, 5-7. Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at my saying you must be born again." There's a lot to unpack here, so let's go through it step by step. Jesus states here that in order to enter the kingdom of God, either to enter into heaven or to participate in the work of the kingdom, or perhaps both, one must experience both physical and spiritual birth. This clarifies what the second birth, the born-again concept, is. The first birth must be the fleshly physical birth through water. We've all gone through this in some way. Therefore, the second birth is the spiritual birth. Just as a physical birth comes through our mothers, who are made of physical flesh, so the second, spiritual birth comes through the Spirit, here implied to be the Spirit of God through articles and capitalization. We must first be born, that is, formed and created, of human origin, or we are not. Then we must be born a second time of spiritual origin. This is critical for being able to enter the kingdom of God. Jesus says that this should not surprise Nicodemus, who was a learned man. Jesus' words imply that flesh cannot give birth to spirit, and that our mothers can therefore not impart unto us spirit. Therefore, spirit must be imparted by God, who is spirit. But I think there is something deeper here. Let's continue examining what Jesus said, picking back up with John 3:8. "The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit." The first thing to know about this is that the words for wind and spirit in this verse come from the same base Greek word, pneuma, from which we get things like pneumonia. In other words, this choice of comparison isn't random, but quite deliberate. The next thing to understand is that the movement of wind is not random. We know today that wind is typically caused by differences in air pressure. High-pressure areas flow into low-pressure areas, which results in wind. Likewise, someone born of the Spirit moves through life in a deliberate way and with certain reasons. However, unless you understand those reasons, it can be hard to understand where and why they behave the way they do. Yet you can recognize their movement. I think Jesus here is describing the foreignness of the motivations and drives of someone born of the Spirit, which makes such people hard to understand for those not born of the Spirit. These spiritual drives and motivations are critical for being one who belongs in heaven. Let's conclude with John 3:9, where Nicodemus expresses his surprise over what Jesus has said. "How can this be?" Nicodemus asked. Nicodemus may understand now what Jesus was saying about being born again, but he seems to be quite dismayed that it is how things are. This is the exclamation of a man who is grasping with revelation and comprehension. It's the sort of thing someone might say when someone they believed loyal reveals themselves to be a traitor, or when someone receives unexpected rewards or accolades. The very truth of the revelation is staggering to them, and they don't understand how it can be true. Nicodemus, to his credit, realizes how significant what Jesus is saying is. We should likewise understand how significant Jesus' declaration about the need to be born again is. However, the phrase becoming jargon can easily rob it of its significance. I hope this examination into the origins of the phrase has helped to shake off some of that jargon effect, so that we can all fully appreciate the significance of Jesus' words when he tells us that we must be born again. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this week's Geekdom of God podcast. To support this program, go to patreon.com/Ciantier. For more, you can visit geekdomofgod.com. Finally, you can email Ciantier at ciantier@geekdomofgod.com.